Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Steve Wyss's Betting Zoo, the series where we get to find out more about our guests and our handicappers. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today on the Betting Zoo to one of the UK's biggest professional gamblers. It is Will White. Thank you for coming on to the Betting Zoo, Will. How are things your end?
Hey, Steve, and hey, everyone out there. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. A bit of a mixture of really looking forward to this, some nerves. I'm not really used to putting myself out there and kind of doing this kind of thing, much more in my element, talking about sports betting on a daily basis, talking about the soccer and other sports, but very happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is exciting. I've got to say, when I was tasked to create this series, you were certainly the one name that I was thinking we've got to get him on. There's like a mystery of a shroud of mystery surrounding you in certain places. We're going to bring you out of your comfort zone a little bit here, perhaps, and get to know you a bit more, Will, because you've actually got a long-standing history in the gambling industry, full stop, really. But I always start kind of at the beginning with all the guests. What got you into gambling in the first place, and what were your initial roles in the industry which got you started?
As a kid, I was always completely immersed in sports. Um, I actually had quite a kind of volatile and I guess unstable childhood. My dad was a criminal defense barrister or lawyer, I guess he'd be called in the US. But unfortunately, he had a stroke at 32 years old, very young. And ultimately, my parents ended up divorcing, and I was 3 years old. And my mum kind of had to make some hard decisions in regards to her future and our future. And ultimately, that led me to becoming very independent at a young age. And sports was, I guess, a bit of an escape. It was my comfort bubble, following all sports under the sun. I remember kind of from the age of about 7 or 8, I used to get sent to bed very early. And I was always embarrassed about that because my mates would come around kind of calling on me, knocking on our door, wanting to go out and play football. I'd already be in bed, but I'd have my little analog radio, and I used to listen to Five Live Sports, and they'd have football commentary from the Premier League on every night. So I just lie there in bed listening to football, taking it all in, and then listen to really all sports under the sun. And I guess what I did get from my dad was the critical thinking, and I was always kind of comfortable with numbers and analyzing things from a analytical, critical thinking perspective. And I think my kind of entry into sports betting was really quite natural. I remember the year 2000, that I was 17 in the year 2000, and Betfair they just bought Flutter, and they launched the Betfair betting exchange in the UK in the year 2000. And I opened my account in June 2000, started betting all sports under the sun, really with a focus, I guess, on cricket and tennis back then. And what Betfair did differently is they allowed you to bet peer to peer, but live in running. And that was exciting and that was new. And back then, there were lots of potential edges to be had. And yeah, that was my kind of entry into sports betting. I was living in Mallorca in Spain at the time. My mum had moved us out there, and eventually left Spain to come back to the UK for college, university. I think I had probably about 10 grand to my name back then. I'd built it up from 150 euros was my starting bankroll. And initially my plan was to work as many hours as I could in the student union bar or a pub around town to pay my way through uni. And luckily, I was good at sports betting and profitable really right from the beginning, with the advantage of Betfair being in its infancy and there being quite a few edges to be exploited. And managed to pay my way through uni betting on sport, predominantly tennis and cricket. And left uni 4 years later with a significantly higher bankroll, but didn't really ever see it as a career. I couldn't conceptualize it being a career because not many career advisors students are talking about that type of thing. And so I did enter the industry, the sports betting industry. I worked for Ladbrokes for 4 or 5 years in their tennis department. I was started out as a tennis trader. So our team would set the live odds on tennis matches 24/7, 365 days a year, pretty much, uh, both in play, so live betting and pre-match. I became head of tennis at Ladbrokes after a couple of years. And then I left there and I ended up working for one of the kind of more well known, biggest professional betting syndicates in the UK. Worked there for a few years, um, kind of punting myself alongside it through all of these roles. That was always like kind of my main source of income. And when I left there, I ended up working for, I guess, kind of a sports betting insurance based business, but they also started and ran quite a few prop trading strategies. So I ran that side of the business for them for a couple of years. And then in 2014, 15, I left employment completely and went completely on my own. And for the last 10 or 11 years, I've been building my own syndicate, mini syndicate. I've got a couple of guys that work with me now. And yeah, so it's a 25-year history
Wow. Yeah.
of pro gambling, really.
Yeah, I mean, I remember those days of sort of early Betfair, the forum era. I think that's the first time you actually came across me, wasn't it? On a forum called Punters Lounge.
Yeah,
That's a blast from the past, must say.
yeah,
It's,
yeah.
I mean, this is before social media, of course. Forums were a big thing around there, and it was different. It's a lot different to what it is now. It's 2010 as opposed to 2025 is a lot different. But it's interesting that you've obviously been involved with one of the biggest syndicates around now. You've got your own mini syndicate as such. This is a question that often gets asked around people. I know Neil's talked about it on the dojo with Nigel. But just how much the market can move with syndicate money, because I don't think folk out there perhaps understand it fully. But there's huge amounts of money being placed, isn't there, Will? From some syndicates out there. Just tell us how that amount of money can surely move markets substantially.
For sure, yeah. There's kind of a bit of a push-pull dynamic, I guess, in sports betting markets where often you'll have public or recreational money on one side and professional syndicate money on the other. And certainly back in the day, I'm talking 10 plus years ago, lines used to be much more inefficient and there'd be more expected value in bets for the bigger syndicates and the lines would move further. And often people wouldn't really know why the lines were moving, but it would kind of be that money behind the scenes that's taking advantage of perceived inefficiencies and often against kind of recreational money. But yeah, working with a syndicate, you learn a lot, and I think more than anything, you get comfortable working with large amounts of money and understanding how and why markets move. And that's certainly one thing that I kind of use in my betting to this day is a lot of my edge or what I do, what I specialize in is technical analysis of why and psychological analysis actually of human behavior, market behavior, kind of understanding why markets move and the kind of mindset you have to have being a professional gambler. It's not about black and white thinking of I've got this opinion that this team's going to win. It's about being willing to bet anything, any proposition, any team, any player, any situation, if you believe you've got the odds in your favor. So, yeah, that was certainly the time at which I guess my betting kind of transitioned from being, you know, I was always a good gambler. I was always profitable, right? But I never really took it that seriously, which sounds strange given how immersed I was. But before I kind of really saw the potential scale of things and how the real professionals did it, I was always a bit more reckless. I kind of burned through bankrolls. I did my whole bankroll in a bunch of times over my career. But that's when things started getting serious. So it was
Mm.
definitely eye-opening. I learned a lot and I got a lot of respect for anybody really that does it and builds it seriously and can scale it to that level.
Yeah, as you said, yeah, you are a professional gambler. There's not many people out there who can say that. It's a very, very small percentage. So again, a lot of the questions that come out from people is what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis? So I guess the question is, what would be a typical daily routine for you in the middle of, say, a football season? As a professional gambler, what's your sort of process?
First thing I'd say is it's a lot more of a grind than most people would think. It's certainly not anything glamorous. It's all consuming. You have to be completely immersed. You almost have to be kind of tread this fine line of, I guess, obsession or addiction even. Sometimes people will ask me, do you think you're addicted to sports betting? And I won't just say no because I think, maybe part of me is, and you kind of have to be in a
Mm.
way, but obviously, there's a balance of somehow making that a positive rather than a negative. And, a typical day for me, weekends are kind of a bit of their own beast, like a weekend, because that's predominantly when, well, sport takes place. Certainly football or soccer, it's predominantly weekend based. So they're kind of, 10 a.m. in the morning till 10 p.m. in the evening every day at the desk, or the bunker, as I like to call it, on the screens, monitoring the markets, thinking about the markets, thinking about who's on the other side, full immersion. And then during the week, I try and take a bit more time to do other stuff, but a general kind of typical weekday day would be, I'm a bit of a night owl. I kind of do most of my best thinking, I guess, late at night. So I wake up a bit later than most people, especially most people that have two young kids like I do. Wake up at maybe 9:30, 10 in the morning, and the first thing I do is I check my phone. And I know probably most people these days do that anyway, but I'm not checking social media or WhatsApp. I'm checking the markets. I'm checking how they've moved overnight. I'm checking the big early morning Asian market moves, trying to figure out if I've already got positions, whether I want to adjust them, whether I want to start building positions, kind of start to get the cogs turning first thing in the morning, which probably isn't that healthy from a lifestyle perspective, but it's you've got to do what you got to do. And after a shower and something to eat, I'll be at my desk, probably do a couple of hours doing the same thing, but in a bit more depth, tweaking my models, kind of just immersing myself in certain matches and why potentially the market is against me, or kind of moving my way, or whatever kind of technical analysis. I try and take a couple of hours off, maybe around lunchtime, go to the gym, have something to eat, go out with a friend or my wife for lunch or something. And then I'll be back at the desk before the early evening kickoffs, again, checking team news, seeing how far the markets have moved, seeing if there are any kind of extreme moves, maybe based off team news, that have kind of moved something into my range where I want to bet the other side. And then, yeah, in the evening, sometimes I'll watch the matches, but to be honest with you, I don't always watch the matches. I do try and keep a bit of a kind of separation from these swings. And sometimes I'll watch the matches, sometimes I'll go out for dinner, or I'll meet a mate, I'll hang out with my wife, I'll say good night to my kids, something like that.
Mm.
So it's hard to find a balance between like real life and sports betting markets. But yeah, you've got to make an effort, especially when you're not in your 20s anymore.
Yeah, I remember seeing a question on a channel. I can't remember which one, and it was the question someone asked was, "What is the first social media app you open in the morning?" Well, on your case, it's not a social media app. You're looking at your positions and your markets, and that's really interesting. And you're right. There's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made in this industry in your position. It's interesting that you talk about you don't always watch the matches. A pro that I used to work with was exactly the same. Well, he would watch the matches, but as soon as he's got a bet on the game, he's not bothered about that match anymore. He's looking at the next
Mm.
match. He's looking at the metrics for the next one, and he's just looking at the result. There's nothing he can do then, unless you're going to re-trade into the game. But it's interesting that you don't watch, perhaps as many live as other people would in that regard. Let's just talk a little bit about some techniques of betting, because the shows that I've worked with you on, Champions League and stuff like that, you've always banged on about this, and I think it's time you hit the nail on the head completely with an answer, which you've given out before, to be fair, but let's just reiterate it for the sake of the betting zoo. You've mentioned the importance of getting on bets either early or late in the market in the week. For example, if you've got a Champions League card, you want to get it on 3 or 4 days before, possibly before, or wait until the last hour. Why is that? Why is it an edge to be either on early or late?
It's about the dynamics of betting markets and the market psychology behind what's driving the odds. At the end of the day, bookies have thousands of events to price up on a weekly basis, and they can't get everything right. And so often there are opportunities, I guess, quite obvious opportunities earlier in the week. I'm not talking about palpable errors or, you know, error, expected value of kind of 10, 20%. I'm talking about, 5, 10% value, which is solid, very, very solid in the kind of types of events that I bet on. And so the betting early part is taking advantage of that kind of the lack of information that the bookies have at that time, that the market has at that time. And if you have accounts available to you, I can't really book with it. I can't bet with any bookmaker in the world, really. I've kind of exhausted all of my accounts, but I do like to get that message across, because if you do have access to accounts, to fixed odds bookmaker accounts, and you can take advantage of that early value, that really is a good starting point when it comes to being a long-term winning bettor. Maybe long-term is not the right terminology because maybe your accounts won't last that long, but that's the betting early side of it. And then the betting late, the kind of betting late ecosystem is very different. The odds are much more mature. There's lots of information and opinion that's filtered through to the market and to the odds. The odds are more driven by kind of deep statistical algorithmical trading, and for me personally, my approach switches to a bit more of a human kind of analysis and looking to take advantage of the algorithmic errors, and especially in this day and age, those kind of mature markets where they're predominantly driven by algorithms. Most people assume that, and a lot of pros assume that they're not beatable. The famous kind of NFL game day or Premier League game day markets are not beatable. I don't think I necessarily agree with that, because I think algorithms still have weak spots, even the best. I think they have blind spots, and I think there are areas where you can extract value and kind of use overreactions to your advantage. For example, team news, the algorithms obviously, they have to take into account team news, and often they'll kind of go crazy around team news, and that you'll see a lot of volatile movements in the market. But I would say, as a generalization, often markets are overreacting to that. So I try and get myself into the mode of thinking, has this market moved too far? Is that player as important as the market is extrapolating? And so that's the betting late part of it. And if you're looking to kind of take the contrarian side or the opposite side in the late market, often it's best waiting as long as possible to the very last moment, and that could be a few minutes before kickoff, where really everybody's on one side of the boat, and you can catch the best odds on the other side. So that's the kind of betting early versus betting late dynamic.
Some of the message I always get is in the hour before a kickoff to a game. Someone might say, I might have given a tip to someone, and they say, why are they drifting? What's going on there? Have we lost already? In your experience, if a team is sort of drifting without any realistic reason, as in the team news is kind of as expected, are you in trouble? Or is this something which is the uncontrollable and you just got to accept it?
That's a good question, and really, how I'd answer that is it depends who I'm taking on. If I'm taking on Tony Bloom at the same price that he's bet the other side, so I'm literally going head to head with him, that will make me think twice. And there, you never really know, but there are things that I like to think about that may, kind of give me an indication of who is on the other side. And I certainly would not want to bet against Tony Bloom at the same odds that he's betting the other side at, or the reciprocal odds, I should say, that he's betting the other side at. But
Yeah.
if I get the sense that it's public money that's reacting to Salah being out for Liverpool or something like that, a more defensive setup for a certain
Yeah.
team that's affect the total or whatever, then I'm much more comfortable. And so that's definitely a big part of what I do is
Varies.
trying to figure out who I'm betting against, what is the opposition.
That is a really, yeah, it's almost like a chess match, isn't it, to a degree,
Hmm.
in that respect. Now, as a professional gambler, you may well need different sort of qualities to survive out there, let alone succeed. From a mental side of things, what do you think are the key aspects of yourself which keeps you in the game, so to speak? And you're going to get some bad runs. You'll probably have some bad months, certainly bad weeks. How do you cope with that side of things? It must get difficult sometimes, Will. So you must have certain sort of triggers in a positive way that gets you back on track, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Um, you've got to be comfortable with and embracing of the risk reward dynamic. I get a kick out of the unlimited potential upside if I do well, right? If I perform in a true meritocracy, I enjoy the upside of that. But on the flip side, you've got to be comfortable with the downside, and the downside is stark, and not many human beings are comfortable with it. The prospect of grinding, being immersed in something for 60 hours a week plus for a month, and then you end up losing money and you end up in a worse financial situation than you were at the beginning of the month. Getting your brain used to that, getting your emotional psychological makeup used to that is not easy. And I'm 25 years into this and I still struggle with it. To be completely honest, I'm not human. Sorry, I'm not a robot. I'm not a machine. I can't just brush it off. And I think there are people that can. I think some professional gamblers that I know of can, and they're certainly much better than I am at it. But that resilience is really hard to build. Um, Resilience is more kind of all encompassing than that. And I've come back from some quite dark places in the last 25 years. I've lost my complete bankroll on a number of occasions. I've had to fight my way back. I actually find that I perform at my best when I've completely, I'm at rock bottom. I remember after the first year of uni, actually, I I kind of the first summer after the first year of college or university, I did my whole bankroll. I think it was about 20 grand at the time. I lost it all in like five or six cricket matches in a row. Kind of all went against me. I had this angle and I just got unlucky. Lost my whole bankroll, and I had to go back to uni for the second year, but I didn't have any money to pay my tuition, to pay my rent, to get restarted. This was the summer of 2004. So I borrowed 2 grand off my best mate, and I used a grand to buy a new computer. So half of it to buy a new computer because I needed one. And I went back to Bath where I was at uni, and that summer I spent betting on Olympic basketball. And I kind of identified an inefficiency in the market where basically the dream team were too short on they were too big a handicap on every match they played. At least I thought. And I remember betting Lithuania against the USA. They may have even won the match outright, but I think they were at 30-point underdogs or something. And I managed to spin that grand up to 40 grand by the end of the summer. And I was off at the races again with a new PC, and I had a buffer to pay my second year at uni, and I had a decent bankroll. So, and that kind of has played out a few times over my career. Thankfully, these days, I guess, since having kids and getting married and stuff, I've become a bit more sensible, and also since I've learned a lot about how the pros seem to operate. But resilience is something I think I've always had, and you definitely need that. Um, I
Yeah.
think you need to have an interest in or awareness of human and therefore market psychology. I don't think you can be a professional gambler if you're not interested in who's betting what, who's on the other side, why markets move the way they do. So that's another thing. And then I think you need to be honest with yourself. I think you need to. I've always said if you can't write down your edge in a sentence, then you probably don't have one. and your prospects of being a long-term winning punter are probably, if you're not willing to say to yourself, maybe I don't have an edge here, maybe I need to think more about it and develop an actual edge, you're probably not going to make it. And then coming into the kind of same subject as knowing yourself, you need to kind of recognize what approach suits you best. Um, I like to call it thinking, or sorry, betting fast and slow, which is a bit of a rip off of the thinking fast and slow. But that's the actual title of my Substack, Betting Fast and Slow. I've written one Substack about a year ago, and none since. Hopefully, more to come in the future. But I think it's hard to do both, the kind of thinking fast, betting live, reacting to things approach, and using your kind of more like kind of in reactive side of your brain, and at the same time employ an approach which is a bit more about slow thinking, about being immersed, about methodical decision making, perhaps pre-match betting, and allowing ideas to marinate. And I have tried to do both, and maybe I do at certain times still, but I think you need to know what suits your personality best, whether you're suited to making these decisions in a reactive fashion, whether you're sharp enough to be honest, or whether you're better suited to marinating and letting ideas really play out over a longer period of time.
Mm.
And then, there are other things, that the pitfalls of professional gamblers: self-doubt. Do I have an edge? What do I contribute to society? Bigger picture stuff. Am I comfortable being solitary? I still struggle with that. That's why I've had various roles in the industry, is because I missed being part of a team. I wanted to be around other human beings. We are social animals, and that's definitely something that I've struggled with over the years. But I think ultimately life is very different. You make lots of sacrifices. You have to, if you want to be a long-term winner. There's lots of questioning of yourself, and not many people can relate to you. And until you start having conversations with people who you meet, who ask you what you do for a living, and you say you're a professional gambler or a trader or whatever, it's hard to really understand how impactful that can be when they are really interested. They ask a lot of questions, but it's very hard for them to relate or empathize with you, and that is hard. That is hard to handle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I once also nearly lost my whole bankroll on a cricket match as well. Funnily enough, it was a T20 game involving Sussex years ago. It brought me back some bad memories. Actually, it was really reckless betting from me, but something really unusual happened in the game that cost me. But let's talk some figures here, because you mentioned earlier that you often involved with the syndicates, getting used to dealing with large quantities of money. What are the biggest bets that you've ever staked, and sort of tell us about some big winners and perhaps losers that you've had.
Yeah, so I'm betting on small edges. I'm betting top European League soccer, and generally speaking, it's going to be hard to kind of carve out an edge of any more than 2-3% in those markets. Really, even the top syndicates, they don't perform better than that on those top leagues. And so to make it worthwhile, you have to be comfortable betting big amounts. And there's a whole ecosystem and kind of hierarchy when it comes to limits, and a lot of that ties into the betting early, betting late kind of dynamic. But my kind of style is, I do bet quite big, but in the late market. And biggest losses. I had a big loss last year in the Euros. I had a big outright position against England, Spain, and France. Actually thought they were, certainly England and Spain were the best two teams in the tournament, but I was opposing all three of them. Lost a lot, lost six figures plus on that. My most hurtful loss, I think that's much more interesting story because it was kind of earlier on in my career and much more painful. It was in my final year of college, so I was probably about 22, 23, and I used to I used to get tips from this guy who worked for a UK-based bookmaker, horse racing, and I was never really interested in horse racing, but he used to send me these horses to lay, which in UK terminology for the Americans out there or people that don't understand what lay means in the UK, is basically being the bookmaker and betting against a certain outcome. So he'd on betting exchanges over here, you can lay a horse, you can basically bet against that horse. So if any other horse in the race wins, you win. But normally, if you're laying a horse at above even money, you're risking more than you stand to win. So it can be very volatile. And so he used to send me these horses, and I was pretty sure he had some information from in the stables, or like some horse was just not performing as good as expected, or some other angle like that. And I think we probably had about a dozen winners in a row, and I was very confident that this information was good. So I'd lay these horses to win a grand every time. So £1,000 that is. So if the odds are 6 to 1, I'm risking 6 grand to win a grand. And we had 12 winners in a row, so I was up about 12 grand. My bankroll was probably I built it to about 100 grand at this point. And I'd actually lost about 10 grand earlier in the day on again another cricket match, England West Indies ODI. So I was just a bit, discombobulated. And he sent me this horse, and I got in late from one of the very rare lectures I actually attended at uni, and the odds were about 40 to 1 on Betfair. So I was like, I'm gonna lay this thing to win a grand anyway. So I was trying and get my grand laid at 40 to 1, and it was just nobody was biting, and it was really close to the off. So I ended up pushing this thing out to 60 to 1, which I would not recommend because it probably isn't value for me at that point. I mean, it certainly didn't turn out that way, but I laid it for a grand at about 60 to 1. So I'm risking 60 grand to win a grand. And I never watched the races because I don't think I had the bottle for it really. But so I'd watch the market on Betfair live. And this race, I think it was about a mile, 4 furlongs, something like that. So I think it lasted about 90 seconds. So the market gets turned live, and within the first kind of 3 or 4 seconds, it's into 40 to 1, which is not panic stations, right? Because it was trading at 40 to 1 before I pushed it out to 60. And about 5 seconds later, it's into 20s. And maybe I'm getting a tiny bit nervous at this point, regretting that I hadn't waited until live to place my bet. About 30 seconds into the race, it's kind of tanked into about 12 to 1. And at this point, I'm sweating quite a bit. And about a minute into the race, I get quite a major reprieve. It's out from 12s to 16s to 20s to 30 to 1. And I think, this thing's had it. I'm going to win my grand, which was standard procedure. And then in the last 15, 20 seconds of the race, the best way I can describe it is, I mean, the slowest 15 to 20 seconds of my life. And this is that I watched this horse go from 30 to 20 to 16 to 12 to 8. And then in a 3 second period that probably felt like about half an hour, it was into odds on, and therefore more likely that I'm losing 60 grand than winning a grand. I think it went out to about threes again and then just tanked in, and then it's minus 100,000 or 101 lay side, as we say in the UK, and I'd done 60 grand, and so I'd incinerated £60,000, which was 60% of my bankroll, in about 90 seconds. And
Wow.
needless to say, I never followed another one of those tips, but that was definitely the most hurtful, I would say, most impactful loss.
I mean, yeah, you're regularly then, you're exposed to 5 and 6 figure sums on a regular basis. But the wins will be sweet as well. You've had a lot of big winners in your time. We were talking off air there about, you've had some big winners in the outright markets or futures markets for things, which I had not thought of that actually. I just presumed your biggest sort of bets and winners would be on a single match. But it just
Mm.
shows, in the futures markets that there's a lot of potential there for you.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think it depends on what market you're talking about. Like, for example, Premier League winner had one of my biggest wins on Liverpool winning the league last year, basically because I thought Man City just they kind of weren't rebased quickly enough downwards when they started the season kind of really poorly, and Liverpool were the main beneficiary of that. But that market really, yes, ultimately I ended up winning a lot of money and was risking a lot to win a lot, but it played out over the course of a season, right? So you're kind of spreading your risk and you've got lots of opportunities to trade in or trade out if you want to and hedge. And so, for me, the kind of longer format markets, the futures, you can take more risk because you do have opportunities to trade out. That was one of my biggest ever wins. I think I don't really remember necessarily the amounts and kind of the size of the biggest wins. It's more about like what the market symbolized. Like Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor. That was one of my biggest ever wins. A lot of pro
Yeah.
gamblers would probably say the same. It was a one-off black swan event where it was very, very hard to assess exactly what the price, Mayweather's price, should have been. And at the same time, you could be really confident you were getting a lot of value because of who was on the other side. It was predominantly like recreational market, and the more experts you spoke to, the more you'd realize that Mayweather should have been, I mean, 20 to 1 on, so minus 2,000 or shorter, and you could get minus 300. And so that type of edge, you're not going to get that very often. And yes, it's easy to talk about in hindsight, but a lot of pros were saying the same thing at the time, and that was definitely one of my biggest ever wins. Real Madrid not winning the Champions League last season, I spoke quite a bit about on our shows. That was, I think, because defending champions, they'd just signed Kylian Mbappe, the Galacticos, but they shouldn't have been favourites in my view, and that ended up uh, paying out. And then I also like politics markets quite a bit. They really suit the kind of slow marinating, really getting deep in the weeds. And I've had two of my biggest ever wins on Joe Biden winning the US election in 2020. Um, Most of my bet actually was after he'd won. So there was the weird dynamic in the market where Biden was trading kind of minus 1,000 after he'd won because lots of people believed that it was going to the decision was going to get overturned, and I would price that maybe minus 10,000. It was minus 1,000, and those type of edges don't come along often. And when interest rates were 2% or lower, getting 10% return on your money in over a couple of months is a very strong proposition if you've got the risk management and I guess bottle to take that kind of position. So politics, yeah, I've had a few big
Yeah.
wins on politics actually, a few big losses
That's an
as well.
interesting one. Yeah, it's very, very interesting that, and you've got to make sure. You mentioned your edge there. You said that should be minus 10,000. You were getting minus 1,000. Sort of briefly, how can you work out fair odds in sports
Mm.
gambling? It's a tough question, really, to be fair. But sort of basically, how can someone make sure they're not making mistakes and betting something at a stupid price?
Yeah, I think I've got to say the foundation of my approach is ratings based, and essentially you're trying to price things up from like a statistical perspective, and you're attempting to rate teams relative to each other, and that probably would deserve a whole like episode on its own, but it's a little bit technical and maybe a little bit boring. So suffice to say, that's just my foundation. And then on top of that, I'm looking at the more human aspects. I'm looking at team news and motivation and rest and load and weather and stuff like that. Matchups, the more human stuff. So I'll overlay that on top of like the raw model ratings and end up with a extrapolation of probabilities for each outcome. And then from there, you have to be humble enough to realize that, or open mind enough to realize that your number is not the number. And so you need to build in some sort of margin of expected value, which would trigger you to actually place a bet or a trade. And that probably is a function of how confident you are in your ratings. So the more high profile the event, the more you know about the event, more data you have, the more confident you're going to be, and probably the less margin or expected value you're going to need to actually bet. So that's the next step. But for me, the most important, the most critical element of what I do, based off betting and trading tens of thousands of events over the last 25 years, is appreciating and considering who I am taking on, what angles I am taking on when I'm placing a bet. Who is on the other side and what are they thinking? And do I still back my opinion or my angle versus theirs? So that's kind of how I build my pricing and ultimately place my bets.
One of the things I took from what you said earlier was that you've got to be willing to bet on anything, anyone, or any player at any time if you think you've got the edge. And that is probably where I would be different to you. Because if I really don't believe someone's going to win or there's not going to be goals, I'm probably not going to bet it, to be honest with you. Even though if I know that the value's there. So I think that was an interesting thing that you said earlier that got to me. But anyway, this is Steve Wyss's Betting Zoo, and there is always a pet element on the channel. And Will has generously managed to get us a pet pick from his cat for this episode. But we're going to start off with my cat, Cricket. She's back again. She's unbeaten, actually. 3-0 she is on her Sunday Night Football picks in the NFL this season. So we've got Lions at Eagles this week. So take it away. Let's see if she can stay unbeaten.
Sunday Night Football this week is Detroit Lions at Philadelphia Eagles. So Cricket is back for her pick in the NFL. She's 3-0 for the season. Let's see who she goes for this one. Here she comes. Who is she going to pick this time? No one yet. He hasn't noticed a bit of pork on either one. She's not interested in either team. Who are you going to pick, Cricket? She'll notice it sooner or later. It is the Lions again. It is the Lions, just like it was before. Detroit Lions get her selection at Philadelphia Eagles. Plus 2.5 you can get them with Bet Rivers on the handicap. Detroit Lions at the Eagles.
She's a Lions fan, my cat, I reckon. Will always goes for the Lions when they're available. But tell us about your cat. And you've not necessarily got the greatest relationship with it, you were saying off air. But give us an introduction.
Well, what I will say is I think my cat looks quite a lot like your cat, Steve. They do seem to resemble each other. I'm not sure if yours is a tabby cat like mine, but yeah, me and the cat, we don't get on that well. I'm more of a dog person, to be honest with you. We had a beautiful golden retriever named Puyol after Carles Puyol, ex-Barcelona captain. He sadly passed away in January this year. So, you know, I would have loved him to be on the show, but sadly we can't do that. So we've brought in his stand-in, Lacey, standard tabby cat, and my wife Lizzie very kindly recorded this video. She's much more creative than I am, so let's take it away and see what Lacey picks.
This is for Newcastle Man City next Premier League round, by the way. And we've got the DMB line. And there it is. Newcastle United draw no bet. Gone for the dog. You having that one, Will? Newcastle draw no bet?
I would much rather you say that's on the +1/2, which is the main Asian line, but draw no bet wouldn't be so confident. Yeah, contrarian pick there from Lacey.
Yeah. The pets are doing really well on the channel, by the way. 6 and 3 they are. I keep joking, we need to put them up on the graphics for day to day because they're one of the few actual profit. But look, you mentioned Barcelona there about the dog that you called Puyol. I've got to ask you before we finish this show because we always see Barcelona shirts in your background. We know Messi's one of your favourite ever players, Iniesta as well. Where did that start then? Your love for FC Barcelona, and does it even affect your bias? Perhaps if you're betting on Barcelona.
My mum moved us to Spain in 1995, I think it was. I was 12 or 13 years old, and for the first few months in Spain, we basically stayed in this bed and breakfast. Um, and I used to sneak down to the basement in this bed and breakfast pretty much every night, definitely on the weekends, because they'd have a TV down there and they'd always have the football on. They'd be empty, and I'd go down there, be on my own, and I just watched Spanish football, and I absolutely fell in love with it, particularly Barcelona. That was the end of the Johan Cruyff era, before some quite few barren years before Frank Rijkaard and Pep Guardiola kind of turned things around. Yeah, I just fell in love with Spanish football. I used to play football out on the streets with the local kids. It's another memory I have from first moving to Spain, and over the years, yeah, some of my favorite players from that era, and then kind of more recent times. But yeah, I do love Barcelona. But
Yeah.
in regards to betting, actually, kind of, I'm more a believer in the fact that because I can separate the emotion from the decision making when it comes to betting, and if I'm really honest, if I have a big bet against Barcelona, I'll be cheering against them if I'm really honest.
I've almost got to that stage with Leeds now. In fact, I've got really good betting against Leeds. I'm not so good betting on Leeds, weirdly. It's probably because I'm a little bit more negative on them than some would be. But yeah, just a couple more questions before we finish off. I always ask people this one. Favourite foods. We won't go into the three-course territory, but I mean, I have had the pleasure of dining with you a few times, and you more on my sort of menu, Will. I always consider you more of a steak man than, say, something on the vegetarian side. But what would your favourite foods be?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. My favorite meal would be steak, chips, and peppercorn sauce. Um, Aside from that, I love a pizza. Love Italian food. Um, I love gambas al ajillo, actually, kind of sizzling garlic prawns that they do in Spain. So I've got quite a cultured appreciation of food, but in my heart, I'm a steak and chips man. Yeah, with a glass of
Yeah,
red. Got to be with a glass of red.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last betting zoo, Sarah Sivian said she liked her steak practically mooing on the table still.
That's yeah, it's
But
definitely the cool answer, isn't it?
yeah, it is. You mentioned there that you've had this sort of solitary lifestyle at times, being the professional gambler. You miss being part of the team. It's been good having you on the Because We Win team. And it suddenly got me thinking just then, because you've probably only really worked with like me, Dan, sometimes a couple of other people, James. Yeah, is there anyone on the Because We Win team that you would love to do like a show with, to get involved with, that you've never done before, that you feel like, that would be really interesting working with them? Who do we need to get you with, Will?
There are two. There are two that spring to mind, just because I think they would make the most interesting kind of shows. Simon Holden and Neil Channing are the two that I think there could be some fire happen. And invariably, Simon and I would end up talking about politics because we both love politics markets. And Neil, he's a fellow professional gambler. He's good for a story and he's good for a natter. And there aren't many of us out there. And often when we do have the opportunity to kind of interact with each other, it's kind of this treading this fine line of sharing ideas and experiences, but also not giving too much away, because at the end of the day, we kind of are competitors as well as comrades. So I think it would be interesting to see the dynamic on both of those.
Yeah, that's a three-way we maybe try and got to see at some point. It's been very, very interesting. What a great show. Great pet picks as well. Yeah, it was more like Goldfinger, wasn't it, at one point there? Pussy galore as such. But Will, it's been a great pleasure to have you on the Betting Zoo. Thank you so much. Like I said, we could have gone on for way longer, and we've already gone on for longer than I expected anyway, but it was so good. I hope you enjoyed appearing on Steve Wyss's Betting Zoo. Thank you, everyone. Please put your comments in. Ask anything to Will. Ask anything to me, and we'll do our best to get back to you. But the Betting Zoo will return in the new year. That is for sure, with some new guests. But Will, thank you very much again for appearing. Loved it.
Cheers, Steve. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. If anyone wants to get in touch, I am on X at Will White Bets. I'm sure the link will be in the description. I don't tweet very much. I do have that Substack, Betting Fast and Slow, and I keep telling myself that I need to write more. So hopefully I'll start to grow my profile and be a bit more out there, especially after doing this. But yeah, cheers, Steve. It's been very enjoyable.
Really good. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Betting Zoo. But goodbye for now.